Welcome, everyone. I'm Holly Corbett. I'm the VP of Content at Consciously Unbiased, which is a movement to build inclusion in the workplace. The heart of our messaging at Consciously Unbiased has always been about belonging. It's about community and the power of the people to have an impact. So today's conversation is Black Authors on Building Community. And this Black History Month and every month, we honor the impact makers who are creating community and environments where we all belong. We have a few authors joining us today. There's some technical difficulties, so they'll be hopping on, but I would just love to welcome our guest, Jay Pritter, public space expert, adjunct professor, and author of Black Public Joy, a book that highlights how public expressions of joy can have a ripple effect. So, Jay, thank you for using your voice and sharing your story. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, before we get started, I know you wrote an entire book about it, and I have it here. It's all marked up, Black Public Joy. But could you just share a personal story about what inspired you to write your book?
So, there are two critical moments that inspired this book. One moment is an early memory of being in a 1970s style shopping mall with my mom and dancing as the music came on the, out of the PA system as it does when you're at the mall. And my mother stopping me and chastising me, telling me that Black people dancing in public was not only undignified, but linked to racial stereotypes. And I was about 8 years old, and my mother had a lot of public space, what I call in the book, public space performance rules, things that I really do in public. As I got older, the list expanded exponentially. So things like, Black women shouldn't wear red lipstick because it connotated sexual looseness, bright colors, really spoke to the Caribbean and maybe being a newcomer versus someone who was assimilated into Western society, not speaking too loudly, not using large hand gestures, things that were really rooted in classism and racism and sizeism. Like a lot of those rules intersected all of those things, and also gender-based safety and gender-based inequities that exist as well. And so, that was my first sort of orientation to public space. But as I got older, I grew up in an inner city community. And as I got older, there were so many expressions of Black public joy that I was attracted to. So teenage girls braiding hair at the basketball court and on front stoops. I loved the way that older women refused to get that middle-aged lady haircut at a particular age. They dressed however they wanted, so vibrantly. It was during the 80s. I came to age during the 80s. And so then we started seeing, my friends taking old cardboard boxes, transforming them into dance floors, break dancing on street corners and at the Kennedy subway station. And so I really grew to begin to really appreciate the audacious and bold expressions of Black public joy in my community and more broadly.
I love that so much. And your book really dives deep into how we interact in public spaces and how culture and history also plays a role. And it's things that we maybe don't always think of on a conscious level, but are very unconsciously impacted by. So it was just such a beautiful job of how you weave all those themes together. I see Janine has joined us. Janine Cook is the author of Shut Up and Read, a memoir from Harriet's Bookshop, and a shop inspired by Harriet Tubman to celebrate women artists, authors, and activists. Welcome, Janine.
Hi, you know how you think you got everything ready and then it's time and then like now all
Yeah.
of a sudden you can't remember how to do nothing and like now your computer want to act crazy and
Story of my life.
it's just like
Yes.
oh of course it's a live show so it's like
Yeah.
okay but
It
I'm
never
here.
happens during the prep calls
Yeah, the
for
prep
some
call
reason.
was on there, no
Yep.
problem. But
Well,
when it's
thanks for.
live time, things are like, oh, let's see how we can, test your gumption. And so I'm here, but I'm a little bit disoriented, but I'm here. And so I'm so thankful. And thank you, Jay, for kicking it off and Holly for the invite and everyone for understanding.
Well, we are so happy you're here. And, I just started off asking Jay to give a little backstory because I know that, again, you wrote an entire book about it. Shut up and read. But can you just maybe for the audience to kind of ground us in what the book is about, share a personal story about what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, so for folks who have never heard of Harriet's Bookshop, which is a small 500 square foot bookshop in the Fishtown section of Philadelphia, uh, you just travel back with me to uh, 2020, right? And if you could think of what it was like on February 1st, 2020, that was our opening day. It was amazing. More people than we could ever imagine showed up. And then 6 weeks later, we were told by our mayor to shut the doors indefinitely. And that's after I had put basically everything I had into this endeavor. And so I went and laid on the floor of the bookshop and cried and thought that I would just live there forever right there on the floor. And then while I was down there on the floor, I did have a remembering that this bookshop is named for who? Harriet, right? It's named for Harriet Tubman. It's not Janine's bookshop, it's Harriet's bookshop. And what would Harriet do in a circumstance like this? Harriet would keep going, right? She would figure it out. She would be ingenious as she always was. She would pull folks together. But one thing she didn't do was give up, right? You're talking about someone who lived to the age of the to 90, right? Doing the kind of work that we set out to do. So I got myself up off the ground, just as an example of one story, and I started taking all the furniture outside like a mad woman. And everyone was like, "What are you doing? Like, are you?" First of all, my family was like, "You're not even supposed to be outside. Like, you're supposed to be inside." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna take all the furniture outside. I'm gonna take all the books outside, and I'm gonna build a bookshop outside, and it's gonna be grab and go honor system because it's the end of the world anyway. So, what do people need at the end of the world? Books."
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and that's what we did, and we did that for months actually, where we would make this grab and go honor system bookshop where people would send us, little tokens of appreciation. One person ended up telling us that they sent the book to someone, an essential worker in one of the local hospitals, and that she expressed how much it was so helpful just to kind of have that form of escape, but also something that felt grounding in a time where things felt so ungrounded. And
Mm.
we said, well, do you think the other essential workers would find it to be helpful as well? And she was like, absolutely. So we worked with a woman named Dr. Gina, and created a project called Essentials for Essentials, where folks in the community purchased a book from Harriet, and then those books were given to the essential workers. And along with those books, folks in the community also wrote prescriptions for the essential workers. So they might say, hey, here's a prescription because we want you to read for 1 hour before you go into work every morning. Here's a
Mm.
prescription. And they range, right? My mother was a nurse for many years, and this is just a token of love and appreciation. And what we realized early on in our development as a bookshop is that we do sit in an amazing position as a community builder, as a hub. I talk about being a matchmaker in the book, and not in the sense that we're the traditional sense, but in a sense of bringing folks together. So those are just kind of just a like light entry point into the bookshop. Many things happened after that. Threats, uh,
Mm.
you know, uh, trolley tours. Like it just goes all over the place, right? The bookshop ends up spreading across the world in many ways, and so that's what the book covers.
And I love how, that example that you used about what would Harriet do? She wouldn't give up. I think it's such a good example of how we can kind of tap into the people who have gone before for strength. When we feel like we want to give up. And I have a question because I was in New York, during the pandemic, and all of the restaurants started pulling their tables out into the street. Was that when you pulled all the books out into the street? Was that before everybody started
I would
moving
say it was
everything
before. I'm
outside?
not going to. I don't know. I think we were probably the first people to put stuff outside because we did it like literally immediately. I was like, well, I don't know what else to do. We got all this furniture. We got all these books. Take them.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things that kind of caught fire. Somebody sent it to Oprah, and then Oprah, did a story about it. And the next thing you know, MSNBC wanted to do a 6-part
Wow.
series about like, well, how does community keep a institution alive? And so it just kind of kept snowballing, and it continues to snowball.
And it just seemed like it was so organic the way, you pulled the books out. It was like honor system. Somebody gave it to an essential worker. Then you started, giving books to essential workers and doctors. Like, I just love that, it organically came together with the help of the community. Loretta has joined us. Hi, Loretta.
Hi, I'm sorry I'm late. I had a speech here in Boston that ran late, and so I'm trying to cope, but I'm okay.
No
Thank you.
worries. We are glad you made it. So, Loretta Ross is one of the most extraordinary change maker in our country. She's back on the show for the second time, a MacArthur Fellow, an activist for 5 decades, a professor, and the author of Calling In: How to Start Making Change with Those You'd Rather Cancel. So, very, very timely. Um, Loretta, we're just getting started about sharing a short personal story about what inspired you to write the book. There's a ton of stories in your book, but just to give the audience kind of a connection to what motivated you to put this down in a book.
Well, after 50 years of activism, I found that I was dealing with newer generations of activists who had a good grasp of radical politics, but they didn't have the grasp of radical love practices to handle
Mm,
those politics responsibly. And they were turning all their passions on each other instead of directing them towards the people who actually needed to be called out, who needed to be checked. And so the call out council culture, I think, weakens the human rights movement so destructively when we need our unity the most to fight fascism. So that
mm,
compelled me to not talk about what issue to work on, but how we do the work. Because I think calling in will be as important to the human rights movement in the 21st century as nonviolence was to the civil rights movement in the 20th. A statement of our
mhm.
values, a statement of our dignity, and a statement and a vision of the world we want to build.
I love that concept of radical love and how you're talking about how, essentially we're stronger together. So if we keep infighting, we're not going to be able to create as much progress. I guess before we begin the conversation talking about groups, just to level set, what does belonging mean to you? I was thinking a lot about belonging as I was looking at all three of your books.
Well, belonging for me means that feeling where you walk into your family's home and even though you've been away for years, you're accepted for who you are because they know who you are.
Mhm.
And they're not judging or questioning who you are. If you're lucky enough to have that in your family, you're lucky to have that in the world. You want that same feeling around the world. I get a warm, fuzzy feeling every time I walk into a relative's house, even if I've never been there. But because they're family, I feel like I know my place, I know my connection, and I'm rather privileged because my family knows our history back to 1844. And when you have that deep connection to both the enslavement period and the post-enslavement period. And many of my family still live on the land. And
Mm,
so I have this sense of belonging everywhere I go when I'm around my family.
mm. I love that. Jay, what does belonging mean for you?
So in my book, I do research talking about the body as place. And so I assert that belonging actually begins in the body. So it really doesn't begin with external validation or even a physical space outside of oneself. And which sounds counterintuitive in urbanism conversations and a lot of the conversations that we have today. But I think it's so critically important. We're in a time where people talk so much about microaggressions. There's so much discourse on the gaze, and there's many different types of gazes, and all of those things are real, can be harmful and dangerous. It is also true that those things can steal your public joy and your
Mm,
personal joy. And so for me, I belong to myself first and foremost. And regardless of the space that I'm stepping into, regardless of how fancy it is, how much social or professional power people have in that space, I always feel like I belong. And I'm a kid from the projects. So I walk into every space like a kid from the projects. I belong wherever I am. And one of the things that I always say as well is that if I'm in a space and I find myself beneath a gaze, because that can happen, people might think that I don't belong in a particular setting. My mind is already programmed to think that it is because my energy is so warm, or my ideas are so brilliant, or my cheekbones are so perfect and high. Like I definitely deflect the gaze with my own messages and conceptualization around who I am as a Black person and a Black woman.
Belonging begins in the body. I love that. And can you unpack for the audience what you mean when you say the gaze?
So the gaze is a concept that actually emerged in the 60s, and it was really Mulva is the person who developed the gaze, and it is really focused on cinema. That's where it started, and the idea was that men controlled the movie industry and women were in front of the camera, and so that gaze looking through the lens. In more contemporary times, people talk about the white gaze. In my book, I talk about the class gaze, the heteronormative gaze, the ableism gaze. And so that's what the gaze is. And usually the gaze renders other bodies, other people, objects. And there's a power that comes from the gaze and a categorization and a dehumanization that extends from the gaze. But it really started as a gender-based concept, and it is primarily spoken about as a race-based concept, but it is intersectional, and people in the same groups can actually cast different types of gazes on each other.
So for you, if you start to get that feeling like you don't belong or you're feeling the gaze, you just have these messages in your head that you tell yourself so that you go back into your body and remembering who you are. Is that
I never
right?
feel like I don't belong.
Mm, I love that. Thank you. Thank you for unpacking that for us. Janine, what does belonging mean to you?
I mean, I think Jay and Miss Loretta really, got it down. I mean, I don't need to, be keep on it. I do want to say that when you're a space maker, right? When you're building a shop or an institution, that the idea is that you meet people. Whoever walks in that door, they feel that same warmth that Miss Loretta was speaking about. That when you come, I remind folks that you always have a home at Harriet's. You always have a home at Ida's. You always have a home at Josephine's. Part of the reason that we're doing the work that we're doing globally is because we want to make sure that if you walk into a space and you're in another country, you're in a whole nother world, that there is still a home for you there, no matter where you find yourself. I think that for far too long, folks have been told that they belong in a certain place, and that place is where they will feel comfortable, and that place only exists in one geographical area. And part of why we take young people, especially from Philly, to Paris, every few months, we have like a program, Philly to Paris, is because we want to remind young people that the whole globe, the universe is your home, right? And that maybe somebody might have told you that you belong in this one block, or this one block radius in North Philly, and you do belong there, but you also belong everywhere else that you choose to go. And you find that we make a parallel between the passport and the freedom papers, and we say to young people, this passport right here is, in similar ways, it gives you access to places, into a world that otherwise sometimes the doors will feel closed to you. And so I was talking to one of the counselors when we got back from the last trip, and she was like, the young people walking around with their passports, like holding them out, like, just walking around the school with a passport like this, and it's just like in some ways, it's a badge of honor to say, like, listen, look at, I belong to the world. I belong to this whole entire, experience, not just like a little tiny box.
That programming, Janine. This past summer, I did something similar, more local, but with unhoused youth.
Yeah.
And, for several weeks, we took them to the art gallery and a botanical garden and a really nice restaurant.
Yep.
And this idea of belonging being a practice.
Yep. Yeah.
And it starts early.
Especially for young folks, Jay, and I don't know if it's because it's similar, right? We work with young people who've dropped out of traditional high schools and are getting like GEDs and diplomas, and for whatever reason, we have certain groups within our communities that have been told, even within the community, that they belong on the fringe. And so, what does it feel like? What is it when you talk about embodying belonging? What does it feel like when you're to find yourself in all of these different places, and to see yourself reflected in these spaces, and to leave pieces of yourself in all of these places? And I find that the young people, I love that moment when their eyes get big and they're like, oh, even when they don't like it, when they go to a restaurant and they're like, but it's still exciting, at least for me, to see them see like that they have a bigger experience.
Interesting.
I was lucky that my father was in the military, and so we traveled incessantly. I went through first grade in 3 different states, and so that's why belonging, like you say, is not necessarily a place. It's a sense of who you are in whatever situation that you're in. And I was very privileged to have such a wide variety of different places to become myself, so that now I don't ever feel like a foreigner anywhere I go, because early childhood trained me to be who I was, no matter how different the location was. But I really don't want to discount the multitudes you carry with you when you know you're walking in the door with all of your ancestors with you. At the same time, you're bringing all of that with you, and they're never going to abandon you. And that gives me the strength to be in some of the most difficult places, like Klan rallies. I've gone to Klan rallies. I'm bringing my people with me. And it feels it really is about belonging everywhere you are, because you belong to yourself first.
Yeah, I love that. In your lineage, you belong to your lineage as well, right? And so there you have that opportunity to say, okay, well, I never walk alone. And I feel like that, especially in like doing small business, it can feel very lonely at times. And I think part of it is reminding myself and reminding others that also have small businesses that not only do we have each other, but whenever we engage, we always start with the question, well, whose shoulders do you stand on? And that gets everybody thinking about, well, whose shoulders, who did make it possible for me to walk through this particular door right now? Who made it possible for us to have this LinkedIn conversation? And how do we honor them and remind them that they belong in the conversation as well?
I love how lineage is coming up so much in this conversation and our ancestors. One of the things that I talk about is that, for Black people, there's so much talk about us having and carrying intergenerational trauma. But I say that we also inherit intergenerational joy.
Mm.
We come from a people of great audacity, people who took space, seized space when there was no space, people who made music with their bodies. People talk about war being waged on Black bodies. I talk about the fact that we can reclaim those bodies to wage joy. And so this is really resonating with me, this idea of the ancestral lineage and how that brings about a certain worldview in terms of how we navigate different spaces in our lives.
Well, it's quite Ubuntu because for us, we understand in our bones that, what do they say? I am because we are.
Yeah.
I cannot define myself outside of my lineage, outside of my people, outside of the people, not who I claim, but who claims me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was expressed in a very interesting way. To be honest, I left the church when I was 14 years old because they blamed me for being pregnant through incest. So, that was furthering my trauma.
Mm.
I was walking down the street at least 40 years later in my hometown, and this old, wise and old man walked up to me and looked at me and said, Sister Ross, Sister Ross. And I knew he thought he was talking to my mama because we look alike. But he said, Sister Ross. I said, yeah. And he pointed his finger at me and said, we going to bury you. We going to bury you. And I was kind of startled by that because I didn't even recognize the man. But as I processed it, I'm saying, I belonged to this man's church 40 years ago, and he's still claiming me as family. He said, wherever you go in life, we still got the right to bury you, to reclaim you as family. Wherever you go, we know you left us, but we've never left you.
Mm.
A warm and fuzzy feeling, I'm telling you.
We are so extra, like using the burial as a like
They're putting dibs on my funeral.
But it's powerful.
Well, I thank you all for sharing that. I mean, this whole concept of belonging, I just feel like you've shifted so many things in all of your answers, from embodying belonging to, understanding the people who came before and who will come after, right? Like there's this long line, there's this long lineage. Jay, in Black Public Joy, there was a whole section about belonging, but there was a line that struck me where you wrote, even as adults, we need to build comfort and resilience with not belonging. And I'm wondering, that concept was so important because to me, it was about never abandoning yourself for any reason. That's what it hit home for me. Can each of you share a time of when maybe you chose yourself over belonging in a group setting, and how that might impact, that act of authenticity might have an impact on your community?
Mm.
Jay, do you want to go first?
Okay, so I went to grad school as a mature student, and right after, I secured a job with a pretty like a multinational architectural firm. And one of the principals of the firm, who was pretty powerful, took me under his wing. And he brought me to a meeting, and everybody in the meeting was an architect. I was the only person who wasn't. And these folks come from intergenerational wealth. They drop Harvard. Anyone who goes to Harvard will let you know within the first 7 minutes or so. And so, they were talking about that a lot. And they were planning a project in New Orleans after Katrina. And so they were talking about resilience, but they were only talking about the built environment. And having just recently graduated from an environmental faculty that really placed an emphasis on environmental justice as well, I was really interested in invoking the notion of social, economic, and spiritual resilience. That it wasn't just about the fact that bridges got flooded or streets were flooded, that what about the people in this place? And so I spoke up and I just made that comment. And afterwards, he said to me, I bring you into these rooms, but not with the expectation that you will speak.
Wow.
Yes. And, I think that is true in many situations. When we look at a lot of programs, my work isn't DEI, but I think a lot of DEI is exactly that. It's about this very superficial, strange inclusion and representation, but people don't actually speak in terms of their expertise, their brilliance, their lived experiences, not in really meaningful ways and ways that challenge people. And so in that moment, I told them there is no room that I'm in where I don't speak. And so at that point, I knew that I had traded in sort of the belonging. I got rid of the belonging for my dignity. And so and I do it all the time. I think it's because I'm Jamaican born. I think it's because I'm from the hood. Like I can't, I will, belonging can never cost me my dignity.
And I think it's, the way you described belonging as belonging to yourself and embodying belonging, like you said, you never not belong. And the more of us who can do that, because if you're not speaking up, then the world doesn't get your brilliance and doesn't get this idea. For the example you were using, like systems thinking, it's not just bridges, right? It's economic, it's spiritual. There are all these other things to address. And so by us understanding that we belong everywhere and using our voices, it is a way to impact community and the world for the better. And so it's just such a beautiful reminder for people never to forget that. So thank you for sharing.
I had a situation that was highly charged. It was part of the preparations for the World Decade Conference for Women in Nairobi, Kenya, that happened in 1985. And the women's movement, I'm speaking large, the big organizations, the NOW, the NARALs, the National Women's Law Center, all of us were organizing for it. And at the 1975 conference, the unfortunate phrase, Zionism is racism, had been put into the program of action from the Mexico City conference in 75. And so the whole Palestinian-Israeli conflict has so overshadowed a lot of the discussions that we were having as part of the World Decade for Women, that without my permission, nobody ever asked me, these white women had agreed that they would not discuss the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And furthermore, they would not invite any Palestinian women to our meeting. I didn't agree with it, but I went along with it because we wanted to talk about the subject of the meetings too. Then, for reasons only known to herself, Bella Abzug decided to stand up and do this whole diatribe that was decidedly pro-Israel, probably was the truth from her perspective. And here I am, a very, very young feminist, having to stand up against my seniors, my elders, and all in the women's movement. I said, wait a moment. Y'all decided that this topic was not on the table. Y'all also decided that y'all would not invite any Arab or Palestinian women to these negotiations. So why does she get to introduce the topic that we were told not to be introduced? And why are y'all letting her get away with that? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
that was a moment that I felt I had to speak out against the crowd because it was just unfair. And you can't make a deal and abrogate it in the same way, in the same moment, and expect me to go along with it. It was already problematic to keep it off the table. It compounded the problem by not inviting any Arab or Palestinian people. And then you're going to take advantage of their absence and talk about what we had all agreed not to talk about. I had to say hell to the no. I just had to.
I mean, Loretta, that takes so much courage. I'm curious. You're such a courageous person. Where does your courage come from?
Mm.
Because of all the people who mess with me in my life. And I had to determine that I wasn't going to let them determine who I would be or become.
Mm,
I had to learn that at 14. So by my mid 30s, it was concretized in my soul.
Mm.
mm, mm. Janine, do you have anything you wanted to share?
I mean, so there's one story in the book where, so Harriet's is in a part of Philadelphia. When I first moved here, I came to Philly 17 years old, on my own. They used to call me Green Janine because I was just as green as can be. And they were like, Janine, you could go all over, northwest, one area you should never go to is this area called Fishtown. And Fishtown was known for being bat wielding, especially towards people. I met a woman. She said it wasn't that we was racist. We just didn't like other people. And I was just like, oh, what is that? And so I'm sitting here listening to a woman tell me about her non-racist not liking of other people. And I was, it's interesting. So that's like one of my first conversations in Fishtown. And of course, I'm thinking I would be down the bottom, which is like where I had been doing my work for the longest. That's like 40th and Lancaster and Philadelphia. It's out west. It's like very like historically, black and astute. And I couldn't get a single landlord to give me a chance with this bookshop idea. People were like, bookstore, like what are you talking about? Like it was like a foreign language for many people. And so the one opportunity that I get, the one door that does open is of course in Fishtown. The area where they say don't go, the area where they say, folks harass you and the bats and the da da. And so then the question becomes, do you walk through that door that everyone has told you not to walk through, or do you not, right? Do you cower? Or do you like what do you do in moments like this? And I was like, listen, this is the door that's opening, so this is the door I'm walking through. And I do, like we've talked about earlier, I don't walk alone. And so maybe I look like I'm walking alone, but try it, see what happens.
Mhm.
um, and Harriet has been a strong example, I think, in that particular community of what I mean by that. So at one point we did start getting threats. We did, get folks calling the police on us for the pettiest of things, and folks saying we loud. Yeah, we loud. Like that's the culture. We loud, right? Like I got drum groups and all types of things coming through there. And so it's not what you think of in a traditional sense of a bookshop, right? And so because of that, the community has also had to show up in ways that some people weren't comfortable with. I've had people who said, Janine, I haven't been to Fishtown. I never came to this part of town because of that stigma, but you're down here and we don't want to leave you down here by yourself. So we're going to come and we're going to make our way, right? Whether that be like, the fraternities were coming down to make sure that we were cool, especially during the uprisings and things like that. There was a time where folks, were marching directly in front of the shop with the bats. And the Fruit of Islam came and stood out front. We had a point where we had like a granny brigade who said, we're gonna walk you to and from your car. And I'm like, yeah, you looking at elders who are, like tough as nails but small, right? Like small and much older, much more as you would imagine, fragile, but not right, not fragile in spirit. And so I think there's something to that, to saying, I'm gonna be where I'm gonna be where I am, and then so shall we all be where we are. And folks have really been supportive, regardless of the history of that particular part of the city. And in many ways, I believe that it also shifted the stigma and the relationship of that part of the city with the rest of the city.
Mm. Yeah, and it's something else that just struck me because we were talking about courage with Loretta. Like, courage is contagious, and like your courage inspired so many other people around you to also be courageous. And I think that's it's
We come from a tradition, and maybe not everyone knows about that tradition, and that's okay. We don't need everybody to know about it, but part of that tradition is the tradition of care. And I've been a recipient of that in many ways, and then also an opportunity to then be in rooms like this where I can talk about it and share about it and remind folks that that's who we really are. That's who we've always been. It's not new, and it's not going to change.
Yeah.
Well,
And
I say I always want to breathe as brave as the circumstances demand of me. Because I'm not about
Say that
being.
again, Miss Loretta. I didn't hear you.
I always want to be as brave as the circumstances demand of me. And so it's not about walking around without fear, but trusting that you will summon the necessary courage to do the right thing despite being afraid. It's not about not being afraid. It's being sure that somewhere within you, you'll find what is needed to get it done.
Yeah. And Loretta, you wrote Calling In. If we go back to your book, you wrote that as a love letter, speaking of bravery, to the human rights movement. During these divisive times, I'd love to just get your wisdom on how we can be strategic rather than reactive in crossing over our differences.
I think the bravest thing we can do right now is to let go of our certainties, our belief that we know what we need to know, and accept the vulnerability of not knowing, and the wonderful space that creates to get to know people who don't think like us, who don't look like us, because that is a wonderful opportunity for joy and growth. And if you are so fixed in how you believe and what you think, then you're not growing. You're not experiencing the joy and the absolute pleasure of becoming more than you ever thought you could become. And so my book is about how we build a strong and effective human rights movement using calling in techniques as the process, but with human rights as the goal. And we can't successfully fight fascism if we succumb to their divide and conquer tactics. So, because that's what they want. They want people afraid of each other, alienated from each other, not showing compassion and empathy for each other. Well, we have to do the opposite. And so calling in is a bundle of techniques you can use to do that opposite thing, to give people the benefit of the doubt. If you don't think you agree with what they're saying, ask them questions, find out more. Just don't affix to them labels that are convenient for you so that you don't have to work your brain too hard. You can just dismiss them because you've labeled them something. It's about doing the honest work of accepting your complexity so that you can accept and take joy in the complexity of others. It's really fun. It really, really is. I have talked to the most unlikely people in the world, Ku Klux Klansmen, convicted rapists, and even the white women that now, that I had to work with. And with all of them, I found myself unexpectedly learning lessons that I would never have received or appreciated if I became convinced that I didn't need to talk to these people.
Mm.
I don't.
Loretta, oh, sorry, Jay. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'd love to quickly build on that idea, because what's being spoken about is this idea of encountering each other across difference. And truly, that really begins with spaces like Janine's space, public spaces, third spaces, civic spaces. I think one of the main reasons that we're experiencing so much polarization is because our public third spaces and civic spaces are under threat. And so what happens is that actually, I think there's too much talking. I think there's too much discourse. I think we're not spending enough time in communities on the ground, being, cooking, singing, cycling,
Mm-hmm.
walking, sewing, being in community with each other. So people get caught up in these sort of political conversations and discourse on the internet or in academic settings or in conferences, but they will never ever get resolved there. The only
Mm-hmm.
way to resolve these big issues is to actually be in civic and public and warm private spaces like Janine's bookstore together. We need firm ground to root ourselves before we can have any conversations that are respectful and productive and meaningful. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
so critical to remember. We keep talking about class and race and gender without place. And in the
Mm-hmm.
absence of place, we will never find that common ground where we can meet each other in love and respect.
Yeah, and I think to go back to this whole idea of belonging is, when you know someone, then you connect with them. And to really know people and to really understand them, it's spending time and space with them. When we're together, we see each other, we hear each other more, as opposed to just, living our lives online. And again, that's why these spaces like Harriet's Bookshop are so important, because it brings so many people together to spend time together. And that's how we learn about each other and learn to see each other for who we are and all our complexities.
Yeah, one
I've
of the
read,
reasons for naming the book "Shut Up and Read," because the first the publishers were like, well, "This is aggressive to me," but I was like, "Well, it's really about listening, right? The book is the whole text is really about like, what if I'm not that great of a listener that I thought I was?"
Oh, Janine, we lost your audio. Can't hear you. Oh,
well, if you
oh,
don't mind, I got a story that I
yeah.
want to tell about how you can create change. Many of you will remember the 2017 march against Trump, which was called the Pink Pussy March because of the pink hats everybody wore. One of my girlfriends was a Black woman who belonged to this knitting circle in rural South Carolina, and the entire knitting circle was older white women and her. And so she asked her knitting circle if they would knit some of the hats for the Pink Pussy March. And they said, no, we can't say that word. These were older Christian white women because that was their bond. They were knitters and they were Christians, right? And so Juanita was taken aback because here's her grandmothers saying they can't say the P word, right? And so what Juanita did instead, she reached into her culture and she started singing, "What's new, pussycat? Whoa, 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 whoa. What's new, pussycat?" And she got them grandmothers, them white, probably Republican grandmothers singing that song. And they knitted 200 caps for the march because she
Wow.
used culture and belonging instead of politics to get the
Mm.
results she wanted. I cackled when I heard that story. I said it would take that bond of Christianity and knitting to get the goal accomplished.
Mm. So interesting. Yeah, knitting was the common thread. Janine, you're back.
Can you hear me
Yeah,
now?
yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's the irony, right? I was talking about shut up, and then I had to shut up. But you go ahead, Holly. You continue.
Um, well, I guess because it's Black History Month, we're going to Women's History Month. Can you tell us about Harriet Tubman? She's an abolitionist, a suffragist, a spy. She just, can you give people some background on Harriet and what were some of the biggest lessons you learned from her?
Yeah, so it's interesting having the bookshop because I meet folks all the time who are also in conversations with Harriet, and that this is many people learn about Harriet probably by the first, second, third grade. You at least have some foundational knowledge of who she is. But then I meet people who are in deep conversation with Harriet, people who talk about her appearing to them in dreams, people who talk about feeling like drawn to her in places in ways that the rest of their friends or family are not. And in this way in which I think that for some people she's almost equivalent to a saint, right?
Mhm.
Or someone who folks come to walk with and are inspired by. And so I think that I fit in that category pretty well. I remember being a little girl thinking like she just the story just blew my mind, right? It was like, well, how do you walk across states without in the dead of winter with a bounty on your head and with dogs on your back and with like how does one do that, right? Like and if somebody can do that, how do I become a person like that who can do that too? And that's still what I'm trying to figure out, to be honest, right? Like there is this level at which she operated that I am just I'm overwhelmed by it. And her, I talk a little bit about the spirit of Harriet Tubman because I think it's a spirit that has traveled through time, and that Harriet chose to let it embody her, but that spirit has traveled through many people throughout time and history, and that it will continue to travel looking for hosts who are willing to do the go a little bit further than what people the traditional society says is recognizable, right?
Mhm.
And I just I sit with this question all the time about you get to a point of freedom for yourself, right? You finally find it. What kind of person does it take to say, well, I'm going to risk that freedom that I finally got for myself, and I'm going to risk it over and over again for other people? Like, who does that? And
Mhm.
what part of us needs to be cultivated so that more of us uh, seek to be that kind of um, you know, person.
Mhm.
It's not as common as I wish it were, but I think it's something that it's at least something to aspire toward, and I think that's why she sits in a place of sainthood in many people's lives because of some of the things that she did that she just didn't have to do. I also like, she was just, she had a little, she has sass, she had pizzazz, right? They said Harriet would dress up and she would change her costumes, and you wouldn't know she was in the room. She could be a man, she could be a woman, she could be a child. You just didn't know what she was up to. And so that level of strategic thinking, I also find to be admirable as well.
Yeah, and if we're talking about bravery and courage being contagious, Harriet Tubman's story is so extraordinary, and she was such an extraordinary person. I think she was born in 1822, right, in Maryland,
Hmm.
as a slave, and she found her way to freedom. And then, because I'm up here in upstate New York, where the Harriet Tubman Museum is about 20 minutes away from my home, and to think about this woman who was able to go back and save 70 other people from slavery in these elements up here because we're in the dead of winter up here. It's like -10 degrees. It's just that kind of bravery and courage is just so inspiring. And then she opened up a home for the elderly, right? She was taking care of people who didn't have care. And so again, back to that culture of care, and just such an amazing example if we're looking to the people who came before and looking to their bravery for inspiration. I just think Harriet Tubman is one of the most extraordinary examples, and love that you named the shop after her and gave her a monument in Philadelphia because she didn't have one.
Yeah, I mean, this was her first place that she came, according to the records that we're able to find. This was her first site of, like, okay, legitimate quote unquote freedom. But I think the freedom started way before she got to Philadelphia. It started way before she left the quote unquote plantation, right? That was, like I said, that spirit, you're born with it. And so when, they say even when she was leaving and she was with her brothers, and two of her older brothers were like, ready to turn back, and she was like, I'm not going back, right? I'm just not going back. And they went back and left their younger sister, and she kept on. And just like as an example. And then another like interesting thing about her, where I was talking to a historian who was saying, like, in addition to what she did for elders when she got to Auburn, she would also take in animals. That Harriet was known for caring for sick animals. That at one point they said she had a bear living in the house that she was caring
Wow.
for. And so she just, again, like that, she just, it definitely, to me, feels like a certain form of enlightenment, to be that in touch with this, with your purpose and what you're here to do for humanity and the earth itself.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful story. And I know we're almost out of time, but I would love to hear from each of you. If there is one thing, one piece of advice you give to people on how to really create a community where we all belong, like, what do you just kind of want to close with saying?
I'll go first because,
I think we were all looking to you, Miss Loretta.
We were,
okay.
we were.
Well, there's a couple of things I would say. Um, One of the best religious teachings I've ever heard is from the Torah. And it says that my neighbor's needs are my neighbor's material needs are my spiritual needs. I cannot be right with God if I'm not right with my community, because God will not accept me otherwise. And so instead of that individualistic relationship with the higher power, whatever you call it, it's about, I must make sure on this earth to make sure my community is whole, or I'm not even eligible for God's consideration. I love that. I love that because it's another stating of Ubuntu for me. It's another way of saying, I am who I am because of who we are. And so that's that timeless thing. And then I also believe that since life began in Africa, everybody's a cousin, just much removed. And you got the good cousins and your bad cousins. Get over it. You know?
Thank you, Loretta.
The tagline of my book is no permit or permission required. And I think what is necessary now is for people to not wait for their municipality to do it, or their government to do it, or the right public space to do it. Everyone today in their own communities really needs to carve out space to gather and connect, whether it's walking, cycling, cooking. We need to take our communities back, our public spaces back. That's the one thing that I would recommend.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, and since all of us, this is a conversation about Black authors, and it rings true. Like, just shut up and read. Like, there's plenty here. The blueprint is already there. There's more than we could, even digest in a lifetime. That's already here. And so take that time. It does many things for us.
Well, thank you all for writing your book, sharing your stories, sharing your wisdom. We loved having you on the show. And before we wrap, can you just let everybody know where they can go to find out more about you? We'll start with Loretta.
Well, my website is not my name, Loretta Ross or LorettaJRoss.com. Easily found.
Same. It's just Harriet's Bookshop. We spell Harriet's with 2 T's. And also JanineACook.com. But you put any of those in, even if you spell them wrong, it'll take you to the right place.
Great.
Similarly, at jpitter or jpitter.com.
Thank you all. We'll be dropping the links to the books in comments, and we really appreciate you being on the show. Thanks for this conversation.
And thank you, Holly. Thanks for
Thank you very
facilitating.
much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Jay, Miss Loretta, thank you.